and welcome to the e-learning video, The Little Scientist, Cracking the Language Code to Learn How to Talk. My name is Lynn Carson. I am a speech and language pathologist, and I'm happy to take you through this video today. So today we're going to go over a little bit about what happens in your baby's brain during the first year as they are learning all the speech sounds in their language and learning how to talk. So I thought I'd give a brief overview here of kind of what happens in the beginning when a baby is born up until their first birthday when they should be saying first words. Before a child can even get to that first word mark, there's a lot that happens during the first year. The first thing baby needs to do is learn all the sounds, the speech sounds that go with their language. And we'll talk more about that in this video. After they learn their speech sounds, they need to start to figure which sounds go together to actually make words. And then once they figure which sounds go together to make words, well, we need to put a meaning to those sounds. What do that sound cluster actually mean? And then when they understand a meaning for a word, the next step is for them to send that message, send that word out to communicate to another person. So that's a lot of learning that goes on from when your baby is born until around 12 months of age when they're going to say their first words. And we know from research that the kinds of experiences your infant gets in that first year has an effect on how well they will learn all those speech sounds in their language and then use those sounds to develop language and communicate, become strong communicators as toddlers. So we'll go over some of that today. So as a speech and language pathologist, I read a lot of research, and I came across a wonderful article by a fairly renowned language researcher, and I took an excerpt out that I thought fit really well with this video today, and I'll go ahead and read it out to you. Infants begin life hearing plenty of speech but grasping none of the words. At first, their understanding of language is limited to the universal songs of emotion and speech, like the graceful tones mothers produce to soothe. To make progress in learning their own language, whether that be English or you, infants must go beyond the broad melodies of speech and break down spoken language into its component parts, like the words that make up sentences and the consonants and vowels that make up words. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this video today. It's really astounding that this beautiful, young, new little infant is actually quite the little scientist, and their brain is working actively every day to figure out all the speech sounds that go with their language and then put them all together and learn how to talk and use words later on by their first birthday. It's actually pretty amazing, and we'll learn all about that in this video. Here are the specifics of what we'll do. You're going to learn what phonological development is and why it matters for babies learning to talk. And I promise it won't be very overwhelming or too speechy. You're going to learn how your baby is cracking the language code and being an active learner each day. And you're going to learn how you can help them crack this language code in some very simple and practical ways. So what is phonological development? It's a very speechy term. It is the term that speech and language pathologists use to talk about the process that babies go through as they're learning the speech sounds in their language. So let's kind of go over that overview again of what's happening with these babies. You have this beautiful newborn who's entered the world, brand new day, and the first thing they are doing, their brain is actually listening right away and trying to learn the phonology, all the sounds that go along with their language. So in English, some examples of the sounds would be p, b, m. Those are a couple different speech sounds we put together and to make words in the English language. The next thing they're going to need to do is learn the phonotactics, rules for how these sounds go together to make words. So each language has their own rules as to how these sounds go together. So in English, we can put a TH and an R sound together. together, but we can't put book together. Those sounds don't go together. And infants are sensitive to these cues very early on. And we'll learn more about that. So the next thing they do is they start to develop their receptive language. They start to figure out patterns for how these sounds go together in their specific language and then associate a meaning for those patterns. And once they've understood what a word means, then they can start to use it in their expressive language, where they are going to say that word, convey that to another person to send a meaning, to send a message to them. So that's a lot of learning that needs to happen. And if you recall from some of the other videos, infants say their first words between 9 to 14 months old. So that is a massive amount of learning that happens in a very short period of time. We'll learn a little bit more about that as we go on. Here's an overview of phonological development with some ages attached to it. So you can see what kinds of things your baby's brain is doing as they're trying to learn to talk over this year, how your little scientist is trying to crack the language code. So in the beginning, newborns are very sensitive to speech sounds, and their first job is for them to try and listen for all the speech sounds in their language and determine which ones are used for communication. The next thing they do is to learn which speech sounds are different. So a B is different from a P sound. And infants are really sensitive to these differences as young as 2 months old. The next thing they need to do is learn which sounds are the same, even though they are acoustically different. So for example, if a man was to say a P sound, that would be at a lower tone compared to a woman who would say P in a higher tone. But the P is actually the same speech sound. So an infant not only needs to decide which speech sounds are different, but which are the same even when they're acoustically different. And that's called categorical perception. And infants can begin to start to do this as young as 1 to 4 months old. The next step is for them to start to string which sounds go together, and babies start to listen to patterns. That's how they pick up on which speech sounds come together to form a word. They can do this as young as 5 months old, and typically the first word a baby understands is their own name because they've heard that pattern of sounds so often that they can start to become familiar with it, and then their brain starts to figure out, well, hey, this is probably a word. They can start to pick up on other words that they're familiar with, lots of stuff that they've heard in their daily routines as young as 6 or 7 months old. Now, infants aren't actually talking or saying words at this point in time, but their brain is starting to figure out which sounds go together to make words. By the time they're around 7 to 8 months old, they can start to put some meaning to these sound patterns that they hear. And if you recall from the previous slide, some infants say their first word at 9 months of age. And so once they put that meaning to a group of familiar sounds, once they put that meaning to the word, then they can start to figure out how to say that word back. And they have started to crack the language code. As you can imagine, this is a pretty difficult thing to do. Anybody who's tried to learn another language as an adult can kind of relate to this. We make it pretty tricky. There are 44 speech sounds for a baby to learn who's going to speak the English language. When speech and language pathologists talk about speech sounds, just as a side note, we are not talking about the sound that goes with the letter of the alphabet. If you want to learn more about the speech sounds that your children will learn in English and when they should say those sounds properly themselves, you can go to the Talking Together website and have a look at the milestones pages and learn a little bit more about speech sounds there. But getting back to how an infant learns to talk, when they're learning their speech sounds, we don't say these sounds in those individual syllables. We talk in full sentences to our babies. So they have to learn how to discriminate sounds as we speak in these long strings. And when we're talking in these long sentences, these long strings, that makes it more difficult to discriminate between sounds because we change these sounds a little bit as we talk. We modify them. As we're talking, we inadvertently add aspiration or breath, and we kind of blend sounds together as we speak, which makes it more challenging for the infant. The other thing is that, as I talked about before, is that the speech signal isn't always the same. So the baby is listening to all sorts of different people speaking, children, adults, maybe even people in other languages, and they have to figure out which speech sounds are the same and which speech sounds are different, even if their acoustic properties aren't exactly identical. So how do they do this? How do they crack the language code? They really are active learners. From birth, babies are able to hear the similarities and differences in speech sounds of a variety of different languages. As they get a little older, 12 months old, they become more focused on the language that is primarily spoken at home. But they are really born to learn language. You can't really forget about the experience as well, though. Research shows us that the language they hear, the types of words they hear, how often they hear words, in the interactions they have with people in their lives also plays a role on how well and how they're able to crack this language code. And that's because they're picking up on features in language to help them learn about speech sounds. So they are using repetition. When we hear those patterns of words repeated over and over again, if you think about hearing when a child hears their own name, that's probably the most common pattern of sounds they hear over and over and over again. And so it's no surprise that it is one of the first words that they learn. They're also using stress, which is emphasis. Emphasis, we emphasize different parts of syllables as we talk, and they use this clue to help them figure out where words start and where words stop. And they also use prosody, which is the melody of language, the natural melody we have when we talk, to break into the speech stream, to break into that continuous speech and start to figure out which sounds are the same, which sounds are different, and start to use that clue to figure out about words. All right, so how can you help as a parent? Now that you have all this information on phonological development and you understand how your baby is learning to talk, what can you do? Well, the first and most important thing is hearing health. If your baby can't hear all the speech sounds accurately and clearly, then that is really going to impact their speech and language development. So if your baby didn't have an infant hearing screen at birth, I recommend you follow up on that with your physician. You will also need to, even if that was a pass, even if your infant did pass the hearing screen, you are going to need to monitor their hearing health over the course of their early childhood. A lot of colds, a lot of flus happen when in the under 5 population. So you just need to watch for that and make sure that you're taking precautions to help ensure there's no fluid in the ears so they can hear all those speech sounds clearly. And of course, lots of language experience. Daily talking, giving your baby lots of chances to hear lots of different speech sounds is one of the best things you can do. And from a variety of different sources, because remember, they need to practice hearing which sounds are the same, even though they are acoustically different. So if you can expose your baby to different talking with another adult, or even other children, that would be really great. And remember that these cues they're using, repetition, stress, and prosody, are how they are cracking the language code. And I'm going to give you a few tips on how to help them using that knowledge in the next slides. So even though it's actually a pretty complex process that your baby goes through as they're learning speech sounds and learning how to talk, there are actually some really simple things you can do at home every day to help them crack the language code. And we'll go through each one. So if we remember, babies are using repetition to help figure out which sounds go together to make words. And routines really offer a wonderfully natural way to repeat words in communication so that your baby can start to really pick up on these patterns. Another benefit is that babies really become very attuned to these routines really quickly, and they really start learning how to participate and become active partners in communication during these routines. And if you watch some of the other videos, you know why turn taking is super excellent for babies' language development. The bottom line, though, is that talking during daily routines, the words you put in actually really matters and makes a big difference to a baby's language development. Okay, so here are a few examples of some routines for you to consider either adding a little more talking into, or even adding a few more of these that you haven't thought of into your daily life with babies. So I think people are pretty familiar with the routines of daily living. There's a diaper change routine, feeding routine, bath time routine. We all have our own unique process we follow that kind of works for our family and these daily routines. I encourage you to talk more. If you're not talking a lot in these routines with your baby, I encourage you to do that. Try talking about the here and now. What is happening? What are you doing? Try talking about what your baby is doing while they're doing it to add a little more language into those. There are also routines that happen in play. So throwing a ball is a great routine you can do with your baby. You throw the ball, the baby throws the ball back to you. You throw the ball, the baby throws the ball back to you. That's a great way to incorporate some routines into play. The other thing is a people routine. Babies love to play with people, are generally very social. Peekaboo is a great example of a people routine. You put the blanket over your head, or you put your hands over your eyes. Baby pulls the blanket down or pulls your hands apart, and you say peekaboo, and then you repeat that over again. That's a great example of a people routine. Remember that when you're doing people routines with babies or any of these routines, short, simple, those are kind of the best routines that your baby would like to participate in. Nothing too long or complicated. And of course, you can make up your own routines as long as each person has a specific role. You and your baby have a specific role, and there's a certain repeated actions that go along with the routine. You've got yourself a routine. I'm going to show you an example of a routine that my mom did with my daughter Addison. Addison was probably about 7.5 months old here, and she's made up her own chase routine. And you can see that each person, Addison and my mom, have a role, and they have a repeated action that they're doing. And my mom adds lots of simple language in, and it's a really great, fun routine.
I'm coming, I'm coming. I'm coming, I'm coming. They're going to get you. I gotcha. I'm going to get you. Back in here. Okay, Grandma's got to work. Grandma's got to work. Grandma's got to work. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yes, I come. Don't you hurt yourself. I You stinky bum. You stinky bum.
So that was a routine that my mom liked to do with my daughter. You could see she's got the repetition of I'm coming, I'm coming, I'm gonna get you, I'm gonna get you. And her job is to chase Addison, and Addison's job is to run away. And then Addison even goes back and gives her a little peek in the kitchen to get the game started again. All right, another cue that babies use to crack the language code is stress. or that's emphasis. We put certain emphasis on different words or parts of words as we talk. And you can really do this really easily by using a form of talk with your baby known as infant-directed speech. It's also known as motherese or parentese or baby talk. A lot of different cultures use infant-directed speech as they talk with babies. It generally comes natural, although not always to all people. Infants love listening to infant-directed speech. Research has shown that when parents or adults use this type of talk with their infants, they look longer, they listen longer, and they're more attentive to this type of speech. It really gives an exaggerated stress pattern, which is what we learned about, very helpful for infants in cracking the language code. So what is infant-directed speech exactly? Well, it's that sing-songy kind of a voice that you hear adults use with babies sometimes. It has a higher pitch, wider pitch ranges, we take more pauses, and we tend to repeat certain words or phrases over and over. So I will let you have a look at this video. It is me with my daughter Addison using infant-directed speech during diaper change time.
You gonna try and eat your toes, honey? Oh, yeah, but you gotta stop kicking, sweetheart. It's easier when you're not kicking. Oh, yum, 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 yum. But you gotta stop kicking. Yeah. Then you can just have your toes. Then you can just have them. Right? There are a couple. Oh, you got two. Did you get two? Yes. But you gotta stop kicking. That's the best way to do it, sweetie. That's the best way. But no, not for you. No, not for you. Just to eat them? Just to eat them? Addison. That's Mommy's phone. Do you like it? Oh, it's not for babies. It's not for babies. You get toes. You get toes. Okay, bye-bye.
So you can hear me using that sing-songy type of a voice with her as I talk. I did have one mom say to me that she felt really uncomfortable using this form of talk with her baby. It made her feel strange. And if that's you, I mean, I think that's okay. Just know that this type of talk doesn't come naturally to all parents. And it is actually very helpful for language development. So maybe if you would like to try doing this with your child, you save it for those private moments at home, and you try and incorporate that into just a small time in your daily routine. Finally, infants are using prosody, the natural melody we have in language, to help break into the speech stream and understand more about which sounds are the same, which sounds are different, and about words. And so that's why songs and nursery rhymes are so powerful for language learning. I used to, again, do this talk in Toronto, and people knew that singing and nursery rhymes were great, but they didn't realize how important it was even early on, even for a very young infant. And this is why, because it helps them crack the language code, as we've been learning. So love songs and rhymes. They're free. They can be done anywhere, anytime, so you can have an extra language learning boost whenever you want it. They're easy to incorporate in anywhere, any daily routine. Even just a few minutes of singing or nursery rhymes a day can make a really big difference to a baby. I had another mom say to me, I don't know any songs and I don't know what to do. So it's pretty easy. We just went on the internet. We printed off a few songs that she kind of was familiar with, And she taped 3 or 4 of them around the house by places where she could see them regularly. So one by the diaper change table, one in the kitchen, one by the front door. And she used that as a little cue or reminder to do a little bit more singing with her baby. Also, you could also join a baby group in your area. The library usually has some really free and baby-friendly groups that can show you a lot of different kinds of songs and what you can maybe be doing, some nursery rhymes and stuff you can be doing with your baby at home. All right, we'll just end the video with a couple things to keep in mind. Your words really, really do matter. You've learned a lot today about phonological development and how your baby is cracking the language code by learning all the speech sounds in their language. And you learned how they're doing it with repetition, and you can incorporate some more repetition of words in daily routines. They are doing it by listening for the stress patterns in language, and you can incorporate more of that in infant-directed speech with your baby. And they're using prosody and the melody of language to help learn about language, and you can help them by including more songs and nursery rhymes in each and every day. Just one more thing, make sure to keep things simple. If you're going to do some of your own routines, make sure there aren't too many steps. Make sure you're not using too much language, and make sure your baby has a chance to have a turn as well, and that will be a really great routine. One last thing before I sign off. I really encourage you to go have a look at this video. It's a TED Talk by Patricia Kuhl, who is a leading researcher in language learning for babies, and it is an absolutely fantastic 10-minute chat that she gives. Really, really worth the watch. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned a lot and enjoyed the video. If you would like to get in touch with me, you can go to the Talking Together website, and I'm always happy to hear from anyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.